Hi, I'm Stanley Heller. Good afternoon. Good to see you all here. Welcome to the 2023 Gandhi Peace Awards ceremony, where we'll honor Kali Akuno and Cooperation Jackson. I hope you like the music by Michael Mills and Rhythms from the Heart. We'll hear more from them later in the program. And I hope you've been enjoying the desserts that we've provided. We made a point for them all to be vegan. I have to admit, when I first heard that word, I thought it had something to do with the star Vega. But basically what it means is that the baked goods don't have milk, eggs, or butter in them. In our climate work, we learned about the huge amount of land used in this country for animal pasture and factory farming, and how much methane is going to the air as a result. We make a sharp reduction in animal farming, one of the points in our rather bold climate plan, which you can view in a flyer at our table. And digging deeper into the issue of cruelty to non-human animals, of ways of eating we don't give much thought about, we wanted, again, to have vegan food. At any rate, we wanted to show that vegan goodies could be tasty. And if you think they work, could you give a little round of applause? And we want to give special credit to Baker Luann Villani for the baked goods.
Dan, those of us on Zoom couldn't hear the applause. I imagine there was
some.
Our
literature table. I hope you'll take some time to visit all the tables and sign up for many of the contact lists. The groups here are part of the over 20 co-sponsors we have this year. And you can see a link to the page with their logos and links on the back of our printed program. We hope you'll visit some of those groups in the weeks ahead. And a special thank you to Michael Jefferson and the Kiyama movement for the most colorful and interesting of the tables, and the gentlemen who are staffing it. A bit about promoting enduring peace. We're a world peace, environmental, and social justice organization. The group was started in 1952 at a time when nuclear war seemed to be on the horizon. In 1960, we began to give out the Gandhi Peace Award to recognize and inspire. The reasons and names of laureates are mentioned in detail in our program. The danger of nuclear war diminished for a time at the end of the Cold War, but then environmental concerns reared their ugly heads, and we added them to our to-do list. We even adopted the motto, peace on earth, peace with earth. And we learned how global warming was not only a future peril, but here in the present in the form of environmental racism in what the corporate world considers throwaway zones, areas populated by racial minorities and the poor. That brings us to Mississippi. A recent Time magazine article on the decline in America's life expectancy noted the inequality within America, the wide range in expected years of life. I quote, Americans born in certain areas of Mississippi and Florida may die 20 years younger than their peers born in parts of Colorado and California. Imagine 20 years of your life. And we know where some of those certain areas are in Mississippi. Kali Akuno lives in Jackson, Mississippi, the capital of a city over 80% Black, in the state nearly 40% Black. Based on those numbers, you would expect politicians there to be very liberal. liberal as those in Manhattan or New Haven. But as you know, race and class issues are manipulated by the power structure there to make sure this is not the case. Those of you with programs know the order of events today, but for those on Zoom, I want to briefly talk about the order of events. We'll have more of Michael Mills in a moment. Greetings from notable Connecticut activists, Leslie Blateau, president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers, and Barbara Fair, director of Stop Solitary Connecticut. Remarks from board member Laura Schleifer about Kali Kuno. The presentation of the award by our president, James Van Pelt. An introduction of Akuno by his Vermont colleague, Michelle McCormick, and then Kali Akuno's acceptance speech. After that, our solid gold coach will draw up to the gates, and a team of horses will take Kali Akuno to Worcester Street for pizza, 3 slices on us. Now it's my pleasure to once again call on Michael Mills and Rhythms from the Heart.
So we like to celebrate living. I want everyone to say celebrate living. Celebrate living. See, we say celebrate life. What is that? It's about living. Our heart beats, it's life, but we say celebrate living. Say it. Celebrate living. I see these brothers over here have something in Swahili, and I'm going to share one with you. Say, Nime Kambolewa Nada Muya Kehesu. For all those who saying, I am delivered, and those who believe in the blood, or those who believe in the Spirit, we're saying we're delivered by that Spirit, by that blood. So we want to give a celebration of living to this brother here. We want everybody to get up and celebrate. We want to get it going, so we bring the Spirit in this room. How's that? So I want you to say, we're going to keep moving. Say, oh, oh, oh. La, 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 la. Oh, oh, oh. La, 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 la. Say Orpheus. Orpheus. So we're going to be quick with a couple of pieces, and we're going right into the Brazilian celebration and lift the spirits up in here, okay? Is that all right with you? So let's see if we can do this. You got that? Who's that? Yeah. I can't hear you. Good. This is a part from Brazil called Orpheus, played by Bill Fisher. La 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 la. you to join the chant, Brazil. La la la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. To the Caribbean, into Brazil. Our spirits are free. Say free, free, free. Celebrate living. Here we go.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Awesome. That's the music. Michael Mills and Rhythms from the Heart. And they're sticking around. All right. Now something special, actually not listed in the program, a citation from the city of New Haven. I'm calling on Tom Ficklin, who's well known for his media work and is an alder of the city of New Haven. He'll speak to us about a citation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be very brief, and it's good to really see you here. The citation is signed, and the more important thing is all of you have heard the citations being read, but this citation is signed by the president of our board, Taisha Walker Byers, and our city town clerk, Michael Smart. I mentioned their two names because I'm one of their 30 wards here in New Haven. I represent Ward 28. But the major point is that we're here, and I'm here to kind of commit to the city to how we can really more forcibly manifest your global initiative. So I'm making a public commitment that I'll do all that I can. And additionally, we had this group that started in 1952, but there are other allies out here that can make sure that that your vision becomes really a real, not necessarily a dream, but a reality for folks here in New Haven, but also folks throughout the world. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Tom Ficklin. A couple photos being taken. On May Day, International Workers' Day, I was privileged to hear a fiery speech on the Green by the new president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers, Leslie Blateau. On incredibly short notice, I asked her to speak to you today to greet you and to talk about some of the big labor issues of the day. And I asked her if she could fit it into her schedule, and amazingly she could. Leslie Blateau.
Thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, everyone. It was an honor for me to be invited here today to join in community with Advocates for Peace and to learn from you, Kaliapuno, about your work and the work of the Cooperation Jackson is doing to further strengthen economic, environmental, and racial justice in Jackson and throughout our country and world. And count me in to organize for an eco-socialist future. I'm looking forward to your speech. So my name is Leslie Blatteau. I'm a social studies teacher in New Haven. I'm a New Haven resident, a parent of the New Haven second grader, and the president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers. And in my role as a union leader, my focus is supporting educators and working to organize educators, parents, students, and community members so that we can join together and fight for the schools that we know our communities deserve, that we can fight for the working conditions and learning conditions that we know our communities deserve. And I think there's a fundamental connection between peace or the absence of peace and policy decisions that are made about public education. We know we can promote enduring peace by meeting the needs of our community. We know we can promote enduring peace by fully funding public education to make sure there are healthy buildings to live, to work and learn in, making sure that we're feeding our students healthy food, making sure that there's funding and training for anti-racist curriculum and restorative justice programs, making sure that students access field trips and outdoor education, making sure that all employees who work in our public systems, particularly our paraprofessionals right now, are paid a living wage so that they can do the work that they want to do supporting them. So let's ask, if we know we can promote peace by funding human need, let's ask, why are our schools the foundation of democracy in this country? Why are our schools, particularly schools in urban areas, perpetually underfunded? I could probably go on and on about the reasons why, but I'm going to name two reasons here today. The first is the federal government's decision to overinvest in the military-industrial complex and the war machine. And the second reason why is our state's decision to maintain an inequitable tax structure that allows corporations to pay little or no state tax and allows the ultra wealthy, like the 12 billionaires who call Connecticut home, who have amassed $75 billion total, 15 billion in the last 3 years since the pandemic started. Our government allows them to pay minimal state tax. So we know why our public systems are underfunded because of federal and state policy decisions. And when we know why, it means we can change course. Another world is possible, and we can get there together. So let's imagine some things. Let's imagine the flood of resources available for our country, schools, and communities if we cut the $751 billion discretionary defense budget. Imagine the resources available. Imagine the flood of resources available for Connecticut schools and communities when we tax corporations and billionaires at the rate that working people pay right now. Imagine the flood of resources. Imagine the clear message we could send to young people, many of whom are still in crisis right now, that we believe in them, that we care for them, that we know they can thrive when their physical health, when their social emotional health is prioritized, when their education is invested in, when their parks and neighborhoods are nurtured. All of this is possible because when human needs are met, we can promote enduring peace. There's a myth of school choice, of the need for school choice. And this myth of the need for school choice is only a result of the decades of underfunding in our school district, particularly in urban areas. So let's focus right now on some decisions being made at the local level. This myth of school choice has resulted in New Haven spending $31 million a year just on transportation to shuttle people across town in the search of the better school. When imagine what we could do instead if we had federal money and state money to really invest in our neighborhoods and in our communities and making sure that we had community schools that folks could walk to, ride their bikes to, take public transportation to, and not be constantly seeking out the better option across town. Look, I am a history teacher, so I recognize that there is a legacy of redlining and segregation that will give us pause when we try to imagine this possible future, but we still have to imagine it. We have to keep imagining it. We have to fund our future. We can meet human need and we can promote enduring peace. And I want to invite all of you to join us as we send a clear message to our state leaders this Wednesday, May 17th at the Capitol. Right now, the governor has not proposed a moral budget. The state legislators are not going far enough to propose a moral budget. And we, the people of Connecticut, can hold our elected officials accountable and rally for a moral budget. I invite you to join us at the state capitol. Buses will be leaving from Stop and Shop at Whaley Avenue at 4 o'clock, as well as John Martinez School in Fairhaven. I think Unite Here is organizing buses as well. We're going to go up to the Capitol and let them know that the time for an equitable and moral budget is now, because that really is how we get on the road to a path of enduring peace for all of us. Thanks for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I look forward to hearing from everybody else. Oh, the bus will leave at about 4 o'clock. I have flyers where you can register to get more info. Thank you.
The question was when the bus was going to leave, and that was answered. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you brought up the issue of the budget, because we proposed what we thought was an obvious measure that had something to do with state spending, and to have the state incentivize exchanging, let's say, gas-powered lawn equipment for electric. In our little state of Connecticut, 40 million gallons of gasoline are burned every year, thrown into the air and thrown to the lawn care workers who inhale it every minute they're working. And we had hoped by now there could be some kind of exchange program. The state said, no, we can't find the money for it. Can't find the money for it. Last year, they cut taxes $600 million. Unbelievable. Okay. Next, an activist who for decades has worked on supporting the rights of the class of people most don't want to think about, prisoners. Barbara Fair was born and raised in New Haven. She's the lead organizer for Stop Solitary Connecticut, a grassroots organization seeking an end to the use of isolation in Connecticut jails, prisons, and youth facilities, as well as addressing living conditions in those places of detention. Barbara Fair.
Greetings to Brother Acuna and everyone who showed up today. The conversation around enduring peace and talks about war, I relate back to the war that has been upon Black people in this country for over 400 years. A war that continues to plague in our communities, aggressively fought in our communities. And when I think of peace, I think there is no peace without social justice. So when I think of peace, the first thing I'm thinking of how we can bring all these organizations together that talk about their individual little spaces. And I think about how do we bring it all together, because it's all connected. Education, climate, all of these things are all connected to what's going on in our country. When we talk about environment, I want us to think about the environments, the conditions that people are living in prisons in this state. Not only adults, but we're also talking about children. So my latest victory in Connecticut is getting legislation passed that says people must be let out of their cells, which are cages. They don't like to use that word, but they must be let out of their cages at least 5 hours a day. That's our latest victory. And there's a lot of other things that go along with that. Most of the people, especially what they call general population, have free phone calls. They have 6 free phone calls every day. They have tablets that they can communicate with. So there's a lot of little changes going on because there are people like me who care about the people who are behind bars that really don't have much voice. No one really thinks too much about them, but I, for one, do. And so the latest campaign that we're working on is how do we end routine strip searching of people in prisons, jails, and youth facilities. And I say that because those people who have had to endure this have done so with no challenge to what they have to go through. I want to describe what a strip search is because until I got a letter from someone inside, I thought it was just strips, you just get nude. I thought that was horrible enough. But no, once they get nude, then they have to bend over at their waist. Women have to hold up their breasts. Men have to hold up their testicles. You have to spread your butt cheeks open so they can look up your anus and up your vagina. And sometimes it's filmed, which I don't know what that's all about. And then once you do all those things with your hands, then you use those same hands to open your mouth so they can look inside of your mouth. Now, this is what goes on every day inside of our facilities where those people have no voice. They happen to our children as young as 15 years old. And when I hear a lot of what's going on in our communities with our children, I'm always wondering why no one is challenging or asking our children, why are you behaving the way you do? And many times if they have any history of being inside of those facilities, these are things that they're enduring all the time. And when you talk to young people, they are very angry that they're forced to do these things. So with that anger is a lot of pain, and that anger and rage is going to come back to our communities because our communities is the one that feed the prison system in Connecticut. It's Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, and Hartford. So those other towns that are really not touched by incarceration don't have to see this as a real big issue, but it is a huge issue. So I just want to leave it there because I could be up here all day talking about the prisons, the awful conditions, the way they aggressively fight policies in our communities to make sure that we're locked up and the people working every day inside of the prisons. Thanks goodness to the, at least for corporations, for the 13th Amendment that said we're abolishing slavery, but it said except that they're in prison. So now you have all of these people in prisons across the nation. And in Connecticut, they're working for less than $1 a day, not an hour, a day. And you need to go on Connecticut Correctional Enterprise and see all the work that they're doing because it's not just automobile plates like they used to think it was license plates. They are building things like what we're standing here now. And they have so many people who are benefiting from that no one wants to speak about it. Many of this furniture like this in universities, churches, schools, municipal buildings, up at the Capitol, these are things that incarcerated people are doing for a less than $1 a day. So we have a lot to do in our system before we talk about peace. And I hope that we can all get together and recognize that everything that's happening is intentional. There's no accident about who's in prisons all across this nation. There's no accident about who's not being educated because that lack of education, it has helped build this pipeline from schools to prisons. So just think about all of that when we think about enduring peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A very serious message. Now, Laura Schleifer, our youngest member of our board of directors, who has really made a contribution to our work, deepening our understanding of Gaza, which is savagely being bombed as we speak, with Laura's involvement in the Plant the Land group, educating us about vegan ideas and encouraging us to pick Kali Akuno as Gandhi Peace Award honoree. Laura Schleifer.
So I just want to start by saying, first of all, this is really a huge honor for me to present this award to Kali Akuno. and Cooperation Jackson. I have been following your organization and your work for a long time, and honor is truly all mine to be able to do this. Thank you. The phrase, no justice, no peace, is a common refrain chanted at protests. It expresses a simple, basic truth that peace can never exist as long as systemic exploitation, inequality, and oppression are the status quo. And that sometimes the only way to end violence is by disturbing the so-called peace. As long as we live in a society rooted in injustice, peace for the privileged and the powerful will always equal violence being unleashed upon the subjugated in order to keep them down. You cannot have one without the other. Over the years, promoting enduring peace has realized that creating enduring peace requires social justice. Decades ago, the board of this organization voted to give this award to Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Lucius Walker Jr., Cesar Chavez, Daniel Ellsberg, and more recent recipients, including the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement founder, Omar Barghouti, and peace activist, Kathy Kelly. Today, we have realized that not only does peace require justice, but the time for waiting for those in power to provide that justice is over. It is time for people to create and implement ways of addressing the current social, economic, and ecological crises ourselves. We need strategies that put the power directly into the people's hands, especially those most severely impacted, disenfranchised, and disempowered. In recognition of that paradigm shift, this year's Gandhi Peace Award recipient has been chosen for creating an innovative way of addressing these issues through collective action on the local level, combined with a broader long-term strategy for regional, national, and global change. This year, Promoting Enduring Peace is giving its Gandhi Peace Award to Kalia Kuno and Cooperation Jackson. In Kalia Kuno and Cooperation Jackson, we have found a community of activists who exemplify our organization's mission of creating peace on Earth and peace with Earth. Kali and his fellow members of Cooperation Jackson are creating a model for how the rest of us might be able to achieve that goal by transforming our communities on the local level and then linking them together to create a new system that provides for human and ecological needs and also represents, understands, and recognizes the interdependence between the two. Based in Jackson, Mississippi, one of the nation's poorest cities, Cooperation Jackson is a Black-led autonomous community with a visionary Jackson Kush plan to build Black autonomy throughout the United States South and eventually challenge and replace the current political and capitalist economic systems with a new system rooted in mutual aid, direct democracy, food sovereignty, community care, ecological regeneration, collective self-governance, land reclamation, community-controlled production, and cooperative and solidarity economics through its People's Network for Land and Liberation. Historically, Black people in the United States have suffered and continue to suffer extreme housing, employment, healthcare, education, and food quality discrimination, in addition to being the victims of police brutality, resegregation, and enslavement through the criminal injustice system. Additionally, Black communities are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change due to the collapsing infrastructure and insufficient disaster relief aid caused by lack of public investment in these communities, and the fact that they are often located in vulnerable ecological zones. Black communities are also the victims of environmental racism as polluting industries locate themselves in regions where local populations are the most disenfranchised and disempowered to push back against these practices. In response to these injustices, Cooperation Jackson's Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust buys and restores vacant lots, abandoned homes, and unused business locations in order to remove them from real estate speculation and prevent gentrification and make them available to the community via creating off-grid housing that produces energy and treats waste on site, parks, playgrounds, co-op business spaces, and other communal uses. To address both economic inequality and the climate crisis and its impact on Black and other marginalized communities, Cooperation Jackson has created the Sustainable Communities Initiative, a Green New Deal for Jackson. Its green team provides quality living wage jobs in ecological regeneration and community renewal. From running a worker-owned farm-to-table cafe and catering company to creating community food gardens and providing a time bank system where local residents receive fresh produce in exchange for volunteering, Cooperation is also preparing for a climate uncertain future through its Regeneration Corps, which teaches high school students about the interrelationship between agroecology, food sovereignty, climate justice, and racial equity, and how these issues interrelate, and through buying land in Vermont for climate refugees in more vulnerable zones to relocate to. Cooperation Jackson's long-term goals include making Jackson a zero emissions, zero waste city, creating a local currency, and setting up an eco-village of co-ops engaged in projects like solar installation, waste management, community childcare, and arts and cultural development. In his role as Director of Special Projects and External Funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson, his co-authoring of Jackson Rising and editing of Jackson Rising Redux, and his co-founding of Cooperation Jackson, the Jackson Kush Plan, and the People's Network for Land and Liberation, Kali has focused on creating the policies, strategies, and visionary ideas necessary to achieve this transformation of Jackson, of Mississippi, of the US South, and of the wider world beyond. We believe that Kali and Cooperation Jackson are creating the conditions for a truly enduring and just peace on and with Earth. And we could not be more proud and honored to help them with that mission.
Thank you so much, Laura. I would now like to introduce the president of Voting Enduring Peace, James Van Pelt, who will provide us with the physical manifestations of this award. There are several. There's a statue and a medallion and so on, and he will come up in a moment and present it. I want to tell you a little bit about him. He's been a leading figure in our organization for decades. He's been involved in humanitarian programs such as medical aid to Ukraine and the Japan Peace Boat, among others, and represented PEP at the World Solidarity Congress in Cuba. He co-founded Yale's Initiative in Religion, Science, and Technology, and has co-founded several alternative institutions, including the Miccosukee Land Cooperative, the Connecticut Folk Festival, and the Green Expo. James Van Pelt.
Thank you for coming, everybody. I wanted to say that this is not an ordinary award. This is a counterpoint to the greatest awards in the world, such as the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Prize is given to people who have accomplished great things. Our award goes to people who are accomplishing great things and will accomplish great things. The first time the recipient received the award, it was Eleanor Roosevelt. And just to give you an idea of who she was after having been the First Lady, she, a couple of years later, hired her own car, a rental car, and drove through the South with no security, raw. She wanted to see it raw, and that inspired her for the rest of her life. That courage, that vision is what we find in the people who receive this award. It's a great honor for me to be the one handing the award to Kami and Kuno. It's in a little wooden hand-carved box. You open it up. Promoting Enduring Peace, 2023 Gandhi Peace Award, presented to Kali Akuno, Cooperation Jackson, Peace on Earth, Peace with Earth. And in the box is a medallion. And on the other side is the likeness of Gandhi himself. And on this side, the other side, is Kali's name, Corporation Jackson, and the date. What's special about this is, number one, who it's going to and for why. But the other reason it's special is because it's made out of a metal. It's made out of a metal called peace bronze. Why is it called peace bronze? Because it's made out of systems, metal systems, that were used to prepare to launch nuclear war. At a certain point, all of the remains of those were collected, melted down, forged into this metal, this medallion. That's, because of the peace, in some ways, it's the most valuable metal in the world. So without further ado,
and he failed to mention that there's another piece to it that's in here, another engraving. So, thank you. I think it's another person's turn than mine, but I can.
Yeah. So we will get.
Yeah.
All right. And there's another thing. It's a certificate. It's a certificate, and it's let's see. I'll show it to the camera first. Yeah. And it says the Gandhi Peace Award to Kali Akuno for his work developing a solidarity economy in Jackson, Mississippi, his efforts to contain the constant crises in Jackson, and his visionary ideas on the need for an eco-socialist solution to climate and environmental emergencies. It's signed by James Van Pelt and Laura Schleifer. Now, to introduce Kali Akuno, Michelle McCormick of Cooperation Vermont. Michelle is a mother of two and has been active in racial and social justice movements for the last 20 years. She currently serves as the general manager of the worker-owned Marshfield Village store in rural Vermont, a member of the board of directors of Cooperation Vermont, and the CVT Land Trust, a coordinator of Regeneration Corp, a trustee of the Jackwith Library, and a member of the Planning Commission for Marshfield, Vermont. Michelle McCormick.
think I did it. Did I do it? Is it good? Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Edelman McCormick, and in addition to being a mom, I am a revolutionary and I am a communist, and I say that so directly to further normalize being able to say those things in the normal discourse. Well, I just, wanted to first thank the musicians today. That was, unexpectedly amazing and great. And thank you so much for that. And to the two speakers, it was Laura and Barbara, for the information that you shared. And I just, kept thinking back to back like that, how clear like the school to prison pipeline really is. Like, that's not a theoretical thing, it's an actual thing. And if you need further evidence of that, look no further than Vermont, that's looking to spend up to $300 million on the construction of new prisons. Meanwhile, our Burlington High School is being housed at an abandoned Macy's. So yeah. And then, since I get to have a microphone and talk to people, I also want to give a shout out along those same lines to the Stop Cop City Coalition and to up the work of community movement builders. You can go to their website, and they have a Stop Cop City section for how folks can get involved. And I strongly encourage folks to stay paying attention to that, and be involved in as many ways as you can, and be taking notes, because I promise you, as sure as I'm standing here, this is coming to a community near you as well. This is immediate and direct backlash against the Floyd rebellion, and they are rapidly regaining ground and using this as a moment to further militarize our police forces and further institutionalize the modes of oppression in our communities. So now back to Kali Akuno. And I wasn't sure what all other people were going to share. And it seems like there's been a pretty thorough introduction of his involvements with various organizations, and certainly the work of Cooperation Jackson. So I will just take it's gonna be fine, don't worry, a moment to share a couple of things that probably aren't ever shared, right? People always talk about his organizational affiliations and all the boards of directors that he is often on, and the various circles that he, lends expertise and an ear to and a voice to. But people don't often know what an amazing mentor and friend to so many people Kali actually is, myself included. And of course, the first time I met him, I was sure I was going to hate him because of the circumstances our organizations were at war, and I didn't know who he was. And it was a whole thing. But I can tell you, the very first time I met him, he moved in that moment in a very contentious situation with integrity and honesty, and with a heart of a peacemaker. And those are the qualities that I continue to see him exhibit day in and day out over the years. And it's, his ability to, so my mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, talks about the importance of treating the person in front of you as if they're the only person in the world, and giving that person your full attention as an expression of their respect for their humanity. And I see Kali do that all the time. He spends inordinate sounds like a judgment, but a lot. Spends a lot of time with individuals, helping them through the struggles that we face as we try to do this liberatory work, both on a personal level and a professional level. And I can tell you that, more than once over the course of the years that I've known Kali, he's helped me from, keep me from walking over the edge of liberalism, right? Just a careful guiding hand. Well, have you considered alternatively these perspectives? And he does this work for so many people. And because of that, he's really earned, from moving with such integrity the trust and respect of people literally all over the globe. And I know this to be true because some years ago, I had this, it ended up very randomly, but a situation where I was asked to help a woman and her son who were in fear of political persecution in the country that they were in to try and seek asylum. And I had to help move this woman and her son through multiple countries over the course of 6 months before we were able to get her to a place where she was able to seek asylum. And in each of these countries, there were contacts that Kali Acuna was able to direct me to, who then came to the table based solely on that relationship and was like, oh, Kali is asking me to do a thing. That's my brother, and I'm here to do whatever it is that's being asked of me. And that kind of, relationship is the one that, is exemplary of the kind of commitment that he has to other human beings. And so, I'm just gonna stop talking before I say something embarrassing or more embarrassing, it's fine. And just thank you for being not just the movement leader and the visionary that you are for so many of us, but for being a dear friend to so many of us.
All right, first, thank all of you for coming and enduring this embarrassment. Much appreciated. Two, I am really honored, truly honored to be receiving this award. I was very moved by actually seeing the carving in person and seeing the names. I looked and studied, so I knew what was on there, but it's a difference to actually walk and see it, and to see your own name being mentioned with so many people that you've learned from, studied, tried to emulate from beginning of end of that list. So I'm truly honored. And then I want to have to give my thank yous, because it's an individual award to a degree, but you don't get here without there being a foundation and communities and people who've nurtured and enabled you, to do what you do. And all those folks have to be honored and respected, because this is fundamentally, I would say, their award. And chief amongst those to me would be my mama. So I want to make that plain. I would not be here without first her giving birth and doing that labor, but B, going through, a lot of trying times with me growing up, and us sharing in that together, and us figuring out, or her in particular, I should say, figuring out to make some ways when there was at times very little resources or what it would appear to be hope. But she always found some way, to make it happen. And I've drawn from that very extensively. So want to give props to that, and then all the folks, who helped her along the way. Then I also wouldn't be here without, those who are doing the reproductive work. I have 2 children, and my wife is at home now, enabling me to do this and to be present. And we often receive these things, and many people get disappeared, particularly women, in the course of doing work. That enables us to be here and talk trash with all of you and share our experience. But that always has to be uplifted and acknowledged. So this is not something that's being awarded or received alone. And I just want to make that known. Now, in the course of doing this, you have the title, which is shifting focus of what I want to talk about. But I want to put it a little bit in context, and I know I have a little bit of time, so I'm gonna be skipping around some things. But I'm here with I hope would be an urgent message. Because of the nature of climate change. Like the time we actually have to kind of plan and shift through things is rapidly, declining. We need to be very clear about that. There is no model that any of the scientists now come up which actually matches reality. Right? So we are in some ways uncharted territory. What we witnessed in 2022 alone far exceeds almost any model or projection anybody talked about. So when we witness, Mozambique and Pakistan, when nearly like 1/4 and 1/2 of their countries were flooded, or major droughts, being experienced from Madagascar to Somalia, to California and parts of the West, right? These are projections that people put off 20, 30, 40 years from now. And if you look at, what the nation states of the world are actually doing, they're acting as if we have 100 years to solve this problem, when nothing can be further from the truth. Now, part of what the shifting focus, just to start on that, part of what is asking us to look at concrete reality profoundly different. I want to bring up a couple of things of what I mean to illustrate. Right? Because there's some obvious things that we've all experienced the last couple of years that we should be really gleaming from and learning from and then acting upon, but I don't think we fully recognize. And let me say one. We all lived through 2020, everybody who's here. And you will recall that the nation states of the world during the early part of the pandemic, they were able to bring global commerce pretty much to a standstill. Now, what's the significance of that? So I've been doing climate justice work since the 80s, really, but particularly since 1992. I was one of the youth people who got to participate in some of the planning formations of what wound up becoming the Rio conference that happened in 1992. That was supposedly the first major UN conference. We've been told about climate change. We've been told basically since then that the world economy and the world system is too complex and too large for it to be altered in any fundamental way, right? That the problem is so big that there is no way to tackle it. You all just witnessed that when there's a political urgency, when there's political expedience to do so, they can pivot on a drop of a dime. You witnessed that. You experienced that. So there is no ability for them to lie to us again about it's too complex, it's too large, it's too dynamic a system to be altered. We have witnessed in real time that they can do it. In real time. So to me, that brings up to us why I'm saying a conscious recognition. If we have witnessed this, first, we have to acknowledge that, A, yes, I did see that. Yes, I did experience that. And then, then there are political consequences and there are political actions that then have to be taken to make sure that they actually can fulfill the demands of the people that require the system to change. That is where the gap is, right? Like, we are not demanding what needs to be demanded. That is a weakness on our end, right? That we need to both recognize. And I'm arguing that that requires, in part, some shifts in our own consciousness, right? Because what it in part exhibits to me, and hopefully, I'm not trying to be harsh, but to be real, I think there is some truth in our minds, at least, that we envision changing, that the end of the world is more possible than changing the capitalist system. And if we hold that to be true, then we won't build the movements that are necessary to change the future and to create a new future. So there's a battle for our own minds that has to take place in the here and now. Another thing is, let me bring it, if you just think that's one shallow example, let me give you another one. Basically, from May of 2020 to the beginning of 2022, you all were part of and witness, whether you agree with this or not, as a program that could be ushered. It just speaks to the potential of what can be done under the right circumstances with the right leadership, right, and to address need. But you all lived through basically a universal basic income experiment, right? The government, the US government, along with most Western governments, gave out trillions of dollars to folks to keep the global economy alive, right? In the form of various types of cash payments, tax write-offs, etc. And it became so profound that they basically led a congressional revolt to end it. And they tried to end it on the basis of folks were making more money, right, from this disbursement than they were working full-time jobs. And what was the argument? We'd rather have folks working for less to discipline labor than to give out resources that have already been dispersed by society, all of us, right? And to end that experiment. Now, the other part that they don't necessarily talk about, like there was, trillions of dollars spent, in these kind of cash payments to keep the economy going. But do y'all realize there was twice as much money that was given out to Wall Street at the same time? So it's not a question of whether there are sufficient resources, right? When the need arises, they basically can print all the paper money that they want, at least the United States government, right? It's still in the position to be able to do that. So the question then becomes, why don't they, right? And part of that is we aren't demanding it. We aren't organized enough to make that demand. And that's a challenge that we have to take. So the shifting focus is, let's actually look at reality as it is, not how we want it to be. And then we need to organize based upon that. Now, one of the things in terms of what I think we can do and what we've been proposing, we put out this whole piece, if you want to look, called the Build and Fight Formula, right? And what that basically is calling us to realize is that if we look at our self-organized activity, those of you in this room, speaking to you, if we look at our self-organized activity, we're actually doing a whole lot. And we think a lot of times that what we're doing is like insufficient. And if we just look at what we're doing and not the aggregate of what everybody in our community is doing, then it is insufficient. But I just take one example. If you and I don't know New Haven that well, but I would imagine that there are a good number of like community farms, urban farming projects that are going on. And if you link that up with the agriculture work that's being done in and around this region, you have the outlines of a local, at least food security network. So what is the issue? If we have this level of production and all this stuff going on, they're not coordinated. It's not being planned. We're not dialoguing with each other enough to come up with a plan to answer the question of what are the concrete kind of, food and caloric needs in our community? How can we produce towards those needs? And then how can we distribute based upon those needs? That requires us to be first and foremost in dialogue with each other, building a level of trust with each other, but it can be done without in any way surrendering anybody's autonomy to do what they want to do, right? Communicating with you about, hey, you're planting tomatoes, I'm planting corn. I don't want you to give up what you're doing, but can we coordinate and this enough to maybe add a little bit more to what you're doing, add a little bit more to what I'm doing, and then let's come up with the community levels of engagement to be able to provide this where it is most needed, particularly those who don't have market access or don't have the resources necessarily to go to the market. We can at least eliminate the threat of hunger from our communities. And once you eliminate those type of threats, you free up people's mind, time, and energy for them to be able to do other things, right? To start constructing peace. Because a lot of what we know on a base level, I can tell you from my experience, a lot of the struggles that go on out in the streets are because folks don't have sufficient resources to meet their basic needs. And once some of those needs are addressed and corrected, then people's behavior orients in a different thing. Other things become possible, right? And then like we talk about like peace and security, the reality that we know is the communities that have quote unquote the most peace are those that are most resourced, right? And where there's more stress and strain from under resources, that is where you will find the kind of proverbial violence. But we need to look at the violence that's actually constructed on the front end, which keeps us all in isolation in the first place, right? The area of the whole practice of setting up a system that encloses the commons, right? And then puts people against each other. That was the first critical act of violence that we have to work to undo. So when you hear about elements of our program about why we spend so much time and energy trying to build like our community land trust, why we made that a priority, right? It was the first and foremost, we got to take that out of the speculative market to enable some other things to happen. For folks to have a basic line of resources that they can tap into. Some place where folks in the community could come and say, I want to do a plot, to take care of some of my particular needs. We now have enough, resources to at least start with in our community for like a program like that to be built upon and expanded upon for some years. And this is something that we want to encourage everybody to kind of take up and do. And there are other practices like this that we want to put out within this formula that are built upon as links to each other that enable us to get outside of commodity relations on a practical community level to build more resources and more autonomy in our communities. But it requires a mental shift, right? And part of that mental shift is I need to communicate. I need to plan and coordinate with others in my community, right? So that we start working together on a more coordinated level without necessarily removing anybody's autonomy, right? Like that's a core piece. Because a core part of what this program is saying is that we want to shift how we practice. I'm not really interested in having a whole bunch of ideological and political debates with you, right? What I'm more interested in is how do we work beyond our differences to meet our material needs. And there's a philosophy that's embedded in this, which is we think it's easier to work ourselves into new way of thinking than it is to think ourselves into new ways of acting, right? And that if we are really working with each other, that convergence will kind of eliminate a lot of the political things that we think kind of get in the way when it's really anchored and oriented towards meeting a particular need. Because you don't have to believe, your reason for wanting to serve somebody's needs don't have to be my reason. Don't have to be we don't have to agree on that 100%. But if we agree that people's needs need to be met, that's the baseline, that's the starting point, right? We can unite on that. And then there's just some other principles like we won't discriminate in terms of who gets what, right? But we can, that's the negative discrimination, but we could also do some positive discrimination. And that means like, okay, I want to make sure the children and elderly get fed. Do you agree upon that? Right, that's a democratic decision. We want to make sure the people who aren't able to be out here farming or doing a certain level of us because of certain physical disabilities, that they also get served as a priority. We can agree upon that, right? And it doesn't require folks to kind of shift their world view per se, because I think all of us have some baseline of what we want to get to. The question is, are we engaged in enough work with each other to build up the trust and communication to enable that to happen? Right? And that is what the big part of this shift really requires. When you look at that, you got to think about what are the organizing pieces and what are the social relationships that are going to be necessary to make this happen. Right? And one of the biggest weaknesses of progressive forces right now is that we don't talk to each other enough. Right? And we're too fragmented in our political views, or somebody said something bad to me 10 years ago or, 30 years ago, right? And I can't, talk to them or don't want to talk to them. Fine, you ain't got to talk to them, but you can plan with other folks without doing that. Can we get to that particular point, that level? So that is what we're really pushing out. And I think I'll leave with my final argument that if we get to this level of dialogue and communication working toward these autonomies, we'll be able to basically withstand some of the onslaught that's coming our way. Because, some of the things that I think we need to be really clear on. There's this nice techno future stuff that's being dumped on all of us, right? So you got Elon Musk who wants to go to Mars. Y'all not invited, but he's gonna keep preaching about it, right? He's gonna take all your money to get there, but y'all not invited. Then you got Jeff Bezos, right? Who's talking about making the earth a nature reserve, right? When you think about it, so if y'all don't believe me, actually go and listen to what the man says. He says he wants to move all the dirty, polluting industries to the moon, right? Move a significant number of people to outer space colonies, and then let the earth heal. Now, think about how you gonna move 8 billion people to the moon. You quickly realize that we can't put 2 people up there sufficiently now. So his plan requires massive depopulation, right? It's with the underscore of what he's really talking about. And I will wager folks that look like me ain't included in his small club, or at least not too many of us, right? And God help those who do get chosen, because they're probably gonna be cleaning the joint. So that's what his thinking is. But this is what they're really putting out there. Now, I'm not saying this as a joke. I'm saying this, concretely in terms of what's being thought. So the reality we got to come with, if these are, if the captains of industry are supposed to save us, right, which is what the neoliberal order of the world basically, purports to us, like we should just go along and let them do all the planning and thinking. Well, if that's the case, there's no future for us. So we got to make that future ourselves, right? And that is the dialogue. That's why this dialogue and this planning is so critical and essential to really moving in a direction. And there's a certain baseline of skills that we need to have in our communities, right? Hard skills, plumbing, right? Woodwork, craft work, things that appear to be old. A lot of those things are going to be the skills that we're going to need in the future. And I'm not saying something like fictitious. I want y'all to understand, we live in a profound period of, just unsteady reality. What do I mean by that? Roughly, probably 1/4 of the countries on this planet right now are essentially stateless. They have no functioning government. Think about that. They have no functioning government. Other societies are in the midst of basically total collapse. Some of them very, very scary. One of them, I would say, look at what's going on in Pakistan right now. How unstable it is rapidly becoming. Do recognize Pakistan is a nuclear power. That means if it kind of completely falls apart and collapses, those nuclear weapons could wind up being on a bunch of markets that anybody could use. A similar dynamic, I would argue for a different degree, is going on in Russia, right? So let's say Russia becomes a failed state. Not that it's a thriving one now, but let's say it becomes a failed state. What happens to that nuclear stockpile? I'm bringing this back to the award because it started in part around nuclear proliferation, right? And it may appear on a certain level that threat is off the horizon. I would argue with everybody here, it's not, right? That is very much back on the horizon and is being pushed because there's another part of this. We really got to pay attention to is this big thrust that the United States government, both parties, are pushing towards aggravation of war with China, right? And a new program of encirclement around China. They're not just going to sit back and kind of take that, willingly. And both of them have interests, which I would argue are against the overall interests of humanity, more or less to serving their own interests. So how do we interject and move, as people who are not part of either one of these nation state apparatus to ensure that there's a lasting peace? We got to get much more organized to be able to exert pressure and influence when and where we can and get prepared for the future. So we got a lot of work to do. The good thing is, in the periods of uncertainty such as this, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. So don't walk away here thinking anything is gloom and doom. They are very unsure. I'm saying these are like the ruling class factions of the planet. They are very unsure about what to do right now. Right? All they have is a bunch of short-term fixes. So the more we get coordinated, united, we have much more of an opportunity to actually create what we want than we could possibly imagine. Right? So one of the biggest things is just the limitations in our mind. And I just want you to remember, right? Like, profound, quick change is possible. You witnessed it. That's just two examples I could cite. There are more that happened during that period of 2020, 2021 that you can point to around in so many fundamental ways the world changed. And it can change in an intentional way. That's the critical piece. Right, so like the great was it sick out or the Great Resignation? Imagine if we organized that and it wasn't just spontaneous. Think about how much leverage and power we would have. Right, and so what is that? If we know what's happening, right? What is stopping us from getting ahead of it and start organizing? So like all my trade union comrades out there, like there should be some serious conversation in each of your trade unions, like, well, how do we actually build upon this momentum, right? What type of education work, what type of actual contact and organizing work is necessary to be out there? And part of this, folks need to think within that sector, how do you think about your survival, as an organized unit in the face of declining membership over the last 50 years? This is a profound opportunity to expand the base of union organizing and to make it a serious political force in the United States and globally once again. But it just taking a shift in imagination and then being able to engage in a little risk taking, right, to try to go get out there, talk to people and start getting them organized to meet their collective interests. We can do it. It's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some new imagination. But it can be possible. It is possible. We just need to make it happen. So I'll end there and open up for questions. Yes. Well, I mean,
Holly, can you hear me? We couldn't hear the question. Would you be able to?
You're not going to be able to hear the question, so. if
I'll
you
try to
could,
repeat them.
Summarize them,
Yeah.
right.
So if I can, in summary, the question was about land being in Connecticut being so expensive. And how, in our case, will we able to acquire land, how are we financing it, in essence, right? So part of just be clear and about this particular piece. There's the history of Mississippi, right, relative to Black people, which is one of the core reasons why myself and others came there to do the type of organizing we're doing. But there was also the factor of choosing it in part as one of the criteria, because there were other things that we were looking at. The organization was looking at it just, about 15 years ago. And one of the pieces that we looked at was where could we afford land? Right? That was already a consideration, like given that we didn't have deep pockets and likely weren't going to have deep pockets anytime in the future, where could we afford it? And Mississippi was one of those places. And what we did, we started a fund, small internal fund in 2001, right, within the organization I used to belong to, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, that was specifically aimed towards buying land. Now, we didn't buy any direct land with any of those resources until 2013. So you're talking about a 12-year of folks, myself and others included, putting in, basically like a dues, self-paying kind of dues, to be able to execute something like that over a period of time. So there's, again, this is this level of thinking ahead and trying to plan that we have to be involved with, and not just, succumbing to kind of the urge of immediate gratification. Because, we need to be recognized and be cognizant of the fact that so much of what, for me, that I'm doing, I'm very clear, I'm not going to live to reap the full benefits of what I'm doing, nor am I planning to, right? This is for my children and their grandchildren and folks in the community who I will never know and never meet. That's what this ultimately is for, right? And so planning ahead to try to meet certain basic fundamental needs is how we've done that. And then other than that, man, we've done almost everything creative you can think of, from the bake sale to rap concerts to writing grants. I mean, we don't leave no stone unturned to trying to make ends meet. Now, we've also through our organizing work, particularly in a couple of fields like in arts and culture, entertainment, we've also been able to recruit a number of different folks who have some resources and be able to be like, look, this should be a priority. Are you willing to, make an investment here in the form of a grant, right? So it's not like personally owned. And we've been able to get some folks to do that. So, I mean, you have to be creative. Part of the thing that I think for a place like Connecticut, it's something which, is beginning to be tried or is implemented the last couple of years in Vermont, is finding folks who are willing to donate aspects of their land and be ahead of the curve to be out there trying to organize them with a social vision and a mission to be able to kind of absorb some of those particular things. So that, to me, I think is perhaps one of the most viable routes. And you're going to have to do some things like that to counter some of the dynamics of capital. Because unfortunately, this New England area, the capital is one of the most precious real estate areas that exist on the planet, right? In part, particularly y'all are nestled between Boston and New York, right? And New York being one of the capital outlays, the empires of the planet, you get all this pressure and all this money that floats around from folks using this as kind of a backdoor market and relief for summer homes or second, third homes. Then you got you got the university here. So all these things exert a certain type of pressure, which is going to take a tremendous amount of organizing to get people to believe in a broader social vision. But you have to have that social vision with some long-term planning and patience, I think, to be able to execute.
And we have a Zoom question. So Dan Fisher, who's been doing work behind the scenes, could you read it out, Dan?
Can't hear you, Dan. You're on mute. There
Sure.
you go.
Can you hear me? Okay. There's one message from the Hall Williams family. They say, "Hi, Dad." More importantly, there's additionally, there's a question from William Hart. What would be the first few items to do in order to approach my community about community gardening?
Hold on just a quick second.
That way we have the wireless mic for questions and all.
All right, Dan, could you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, of course. What would be the first few items to do in order to approach my community about community gardening? That's from William Hart.
Okay, all right. So the question for those of you out there trying to summarize, what would be some of the first things to do to approach his community about community gardening, right? The first thing I would recommend from my experience and our kind of collective experience is first and foremost, do a survey of what actually exists in your community already. I would wager that there are projects that are already underway. Some of which, right, some of which are public, some of which are not. You know, and just really do some patient digging to kind of ascertain what exists. Then the second thing is you got to try to build relationships with those who are doing that work to ascertain kind of what gaps and what resources they may need to grow, develop, and expand. And then what areas are they covering, what areas are not covering. Then the third thing is from that, right, now what happens over time is then you kind of figure out what we would call kind of a gap analysis to figure out like, well, what now needs to be built that isn't built that would add some more capacity to what exists in our community and to be able to fulfill broader needs than what is already being produced. And then that has to be coordinated in some planned fashion. And there's two levels, because a lot of folks, you know, produce primarily for their own consumption and then that of whom they know. And some of that we don't want to, I would argue, we don't want to alter and shift. So it's in part convincing those who are engaged in that type of production to either lend like knowledge and expertise of how they're doing what they're doing, to be in relationship with others, to expand upon that, which doesn't necessarily require them to change their productive capacity. But you do want to encourage, at a certain point, can you lend more capacity for folks to do it and grow and expand? And would you be willing to do more growing yourself, right? To lend to this particular network? Because there is a dynamic we have to be mindful of. It's not just more folks being involved in these activities. That is a requirement. But there also is a level of just productive efficiency that we need to get to, right? And to be able to meet people's needs and take them out of these kind of market relationships of folks having to be dependent upon going to a grocery store, but you're asking them folks to be dependent upon their relationship with each other to meet their needs. And there's a trust building factor and time that goes into that. And there's a knowledge factor, right? Because you can have all the great intention you want, but if folks don't know how to grow food, they don't know how to grow food. And so there's a knowledge that has to be acquired on how to do that and how to do it well. And so this is don't look at it as an immediate thing. This is something that you're gonna have to work yourself towards. We're still working our way towards, you know, a level of food security in Jackson, and we still have a long way to go in that regard. But those are some of the immediate steps that we would recommend, you know, based on our thing. Just don't expect, you know, none of us live in an absolute desert where nothing is happening. We just may not know about it. And so the critical thing is to learn about it, to be able to learn who and what is actually in our communities. And typically there's a lot more going on than we suspect.
Okay, we have time for just a question or two more. We have a lot of booths for people to take literature and look at things, a lot of food that won't eat itself. So another question from the audience.
Yes.
Yes, so the strategy and accomplishments of Cooperation Jackson and other related projects, I think, are truly impressive. And I think facing the capitalism, you know, facing what we know is coming in terms of the climate crisis and general crisis of capitalism, interference, war, and all these things, that the impulse to create sustainable communities where we can protect and survive the future is compelling. I wonder though about your political perspectives on a slightly different level. For example, it seems to me that we can put all the pennies in the jar we want and secure land and build secure communities without fundamentally challenging the structure of capitalism at all. And that historically what's been required is massive political movement, independent parties, like, of course, in our own tradition, independent Black political parties, Chicano political parties, political parties, as well as the actual goal of displacing this government. And so I wonder where you are on that, and tell you why I ask. Recently, there's been major crises, like in first the water crisis, then the judicial crisis, that. In Atlanta, there's been a huge crisis of Stockholm City. And I have to tell you, when stuff comes into the news, all my friends, we all look at each other and we say, who's going to call a national march? Who's going to organize people to do the powerful solidarity of millions of people in the streets? And I don't see that happening. I don't see a leadership coalescing around that perspective where those actions can happen and those actions in turn lay the foundation for a party independent of the Democratic Party. So that's my, we all come from different traditions, but I sort of like to know your reaction to the perspective. Thank you.
Let me say this very clearly. We are trying to get to where you're going, right? Come from a very similar tradition. And just speaking for myself, it was around the inadequacies of the left, how out of place the left was after September 11th, that to me gradually was like, we're pushing nationally when we don't have the base to move anything nationally. So I'm not one who's just into small, isolated projects for small, isolated projects. Not my point, right? Like the small is beautiful is a real thing, but I can tell you from like our experience in Jackson, right now, the state government is basically removing, home rule from the city of Jackson. And they can do that because we're fundamentally isolated. So being isolated only enables you to get crushed if you're not very clear about the need for a statewide and a nationwide and an international movement. So we haven't forgotten that, but we're not abandoning that in any form or fashion. But it's just trying to say like the, with the Black Liberation Movement, we got devastated in the 70s and 80s. We still haven't fully recovered from that. Right. And then we had, chemical and biological warfare perpetrated on the community to a great extent, basically from the 80s through the 90s. Right. Victim of that myself, father being a crack addict, right. And being taken out from that. So I'm not speaking anecdotally, I'm speaking practically. That just destroyed the organized bases and the institutions that we had in the Black community. I'm only using that because that's what I know best. Right, but we're not the only community that went through that. Puerto Rican community went through that. Chicano community went through that. Indigenous communities went through that. Poor working class communities went through that. So we don't have the level of just institutional and social basis in the organizing we had just 30 or 40 years ago. And I can say that about any Black community I walk in. I can tell you automatically we don't have what we used to have. If you can go from the churches to the civic organizations, like all the different things in between. We just don't have that level of organizing that we used to. So this program in part is saying, look, there's some basics that we have to step back to and build up, right? To be able to launch a national and international movement. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't call for nothing now. I mean, Cooperation Jackson is very much involved with a Cop City, the spokesperson is one of the primary spokesperson. We used to be the co-chairs of the same organization for many years, trying to push out, a certain level of program. And I think even, we're still relating to each other through the People's Network for Land and Liberation Directly, CMB and Cooperation Jackson, being kind of the two, I would think, main anchors of that. But we're still very clear that we don't think that we're not opposed to anybody else calling for a national peace, but we don't yet have the capacity to kind of pull that off. Right now, if other institutions want to come and help us and be in alliance with that, great, right? But we're not there yet. But we're also very clear that if we hadn't done a certain level of base building, if they hadn't, you wouldn't have what you have with Cooperation Jackson, nor if CMB hadn't been doing this base building, nor would you have Cop City popping off in the way that it's popping off. So we think that there's some, we've built a level of proof of concept around the base building work, but it's just a phase of where we want to go. It's not the end result of where we aim to be in 5 years, 10 years from now.
Great. Maybe we could have one more question. Is there one from the audience here?
Don't be shy. Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh,
How would you say the working through the list of that have there, or also not completely facing the and the organization,
Yeah, being clear about our mission to the greatest extent possible enables that to happen. Also being situationally aware. So let me be real and concrete, especially since this is probably the last question we're going to be able to answer. Basically, since 2017, in the state of Mississippi, the Republicans, which in our case are, what's going on now with the MAGA movement, whatever, that's been the case in Mississippi for a long time, right? Like the rest of the country is just growing into what Mississippi has been to a certain extent. But they acquired a supermajority in 2017. And that forced us to shift a number of different things about our practice, right? So some of the things that were being described about our work, right, the way it was phrased was from an earlier period of our work. We are still working towards like a just transition plan or like a Green New Deal on a local level, but we're not talking about it as much as we used to. Why? Right? The premise is now, let's make the material changes first. Because if we just keep promoting, and we've already had experience on a certain level, we just keep promoting and advocating like strictly on a policy level, that supermajority is very fully intent on just stopping it and creating laws that will then make it impossible to execute without running into some criminal penalties, right? And we know a period like that is coming. But if they're going to make what we do, throughout this country, what we try to do, they're going to try to make it illegal. That's the phase of struggle that we are at. But we want to be prepared as much as possible for that confrontation. So we've kind of stopped. Cooperation Jackson, on a certain level, stopped talking about a lot of policy work relative to the state of Mississippi. Not that it's not important, but it's like, with their supermajority, they're just going to create laws to say, they've already done some stuff like, no, municipalities cannot set their own wages. That killed our Fight for 15 campaign, right? That just as an official thing. Now, the pandemic made it a reality, right? But that's a reality you see with inflation, which is an intentional act of capitalists to kind of do certain type of acts to discipline labor. They're trying to take back the gains that were made during that short period of time. But we're very clear, like we need to kind of move and develop the capacity, right? And then where the tricky part of it comes in is just, again, situational analysis. Do we agree with everything the administration does? No, not in any fundamental way. Do they agree with everything we do? No, not in any fundamental way. But I'm very clear that I get to play at least in a field with the municipal government that I have that y'all are not able to play in, right? I'm not blind by that in the sense that, you know, we have a more progressive leaning mayor and city council that if we want to ask for certain things, we can, right? But we just need to be very clear and strategic of when and what we want to do and to ask for. So our practice has primarily been to inform, but to not ask. But we're not asking them to change certain policies at this particular point in time. It's just more or less like, look, we are thinking about, while we're working, we're going to build this, you know, we're building an eco village piece by piece, layer by layer. And a lot of that is going to require, like in practical senses, getting waivers on certain things that, you know, are kind of required. Like to be off grid, you actually got to get permission to kind of, you can do it, but then you might again face those criminal penalties. So if you do that, you better be ready for it. But, or you can take the other route that we're doing, like we're letting y'all know, and we're going to become, ask for permission when the time is right to actually pass what we've already done. Right? So, you know, it's like asking permission after the fact, but let's set the material reality, because the material reality sets a basis that we would argue that folks in our community would and do support because they see the benefits of it and want to participate in also having those things. So, you know, it's like, it's a situational analysis and an analysis and read of our situation. So you still want to, I would argue, folks, you know, on the local municipal level, try to get the folks that you can work with to the greatest extent possible in places to make certain those critical decisions. But you're right, you don't depend upon them. Because how we frame it is like, you know, and I'll leave with this, like anybody who's thinking of running for office within this system, what you're asking, you know, what you're taking on or attempting to take on is to manage the contradictions of capitalism. If you're real and trying to move from a more radical perspective, you understand the contradictions of capitalism cannot be managed. So you've actually set yourself up for an impossible task. Understanding that, then what is your role if you're going to be an elected official? Your role, I would argue, becomes to heighten the contradictions, not try to manage them, right? Not try to manage them in any way. You're there to cause trouble. Cause as much trouble as you can to enable more space to happen for social movements to fill in the gaps, right? And then be able to build the space and the movements and the strength that we need to enable the people to actually take the lead and being the agents of change, right? That we need them to be. That's much harder to stop, but you can't have a role in creating more space, right? But if you walk in there thinking that you're gonna manage the contradictions, there's too much history that dictates like the system will ultimately contain you and tame you, then you will be able to break it depending upon your orientation.
That's great. That's great. There's so much more we could get into, but you know, only have a limited amount of time here. I know you want to look at the booths and get some of the food and perhaps talk informally. And wanted just a few more thank yous. This institution, the Dixwell Community House, you know, people really put themselves together in this community to get it going again. It actually had stopped and had closed down, and they built this magnificent place. I mean, you know, go see the library sometime, this gym and all that. It's amazing. We really want to thank them for allowing us to have the Gandhi Peace Award here. We want to, we want to thank Michael Mills, who's volunteered to stay on and provide for more music, and Eric Stan, who's doing the challenge for us. So one more, let's hear it for Stan.
Yes.
And one more round, that's a standing round of applause for our laureate, Gandhi Peace Laureate, Aria. Thank you all for coming. Please look at the booth, have some food. Good afternoon.